Welcome to the Marketing Millennials, the No BS Marketing Podcast. I'm Daniel Murray, and join me for unfiltered conversations with the brains behind marketing's coolest companies. The one request I tell our guests, stories or it didn't happen. Get ready to turn the up. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Marketing Millennials podcast. Today, I have Ian on the podcast. He is, funny enough, a podcasting expert. So now I can get critiques on my podcast by talking to someone who does this for a living. So excited to chat on that. But I want Ian to give him his little background on how he got into marketing, and then we can talk about edutainment content and everything content. So excited to chat.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on the show and super excited. I'm a fan. I also got to say, as a plug, I love the bathroom break idea. I think that's super clever and funny in the way that y'all are doing it. I think it's hilarious. So it's just a great idea. And, more shows should have either segments like that or extra episodes or things that are in that like 15-minute or less range, depending on how long you spend in the bathroom, I suppose.
Yeah, it depends who you are on the bathroom. It literally came out of an idea. Me and Jay were sitting because we're doing something for Inbound this year, and we're like, we should just do a podcast episode. We talk about marketing all the time in the background, but we want to do it for like 10 minutes. What happens in 10 minutes? Usually, like when you back in the day when you used to sit in a desk job, everybody you had 10 people questioned you after 10 minutes of going to the bathroom. So we call it a bathroom break. So it's
I
funny.
love it.
Uh,
But yeah,
um,
so I started
yeah.
marketing. I got about a decade ago. So I got out of I was in the military. I went to West Point, then I was in the army, and then I got out and I was in ad sales. And I switched over from ad sales to joining the marketing team for the media company that I was at. And so that was sort of my start into it. And then flash forward about 8 years, and I've been CEO of Caspian Studios for past 4 years, and we can get all into that. But I've been working with marketers basically every single day for the past, you know, 9 years, 10 years.
I want to open this up because you do have a really popular show, Murder in HR, that you've been producing. But I also want to connect this to something you talk about is the edutainment graph. So
Yeah.
can you break down how you thought about murder in HR and your edutainment graph together and how it worked, so people can have a real life example and how you think about it in your graph that you make?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think it starts off with the fact that like most marketers realize that content is sort of in all of marketing, right? It's like your ad copy, your emails, your the actual quote unquote content marketing that you're doing, whether it's building podcasts or blog articles or whatever it is. So really, content is in everything that you're doing. And I was sort of trying to figure out a shorthand way to think about this stuff, and I came up with this idea, which is not revolutionary, called the edutainment graph. And basically, if you were to just plot your content with educational on like the x-axis and uh, entertaining on the y-axis, and be really honest with yourself and be like, where, if I this blog that I just wrote, where would this land? Like, it's probably, I don't know, a 6 out of 10 educational and entertaining. It's probably like a 2. And my whole thought was basically like, how do we make top right hand quadrant stuff? Like, how do we make stuff that's actually above a 5 entertaining and, and hopefully, super educational. And so I started just plotting a bunch of content like that, and it became a little project of mine. Like, I would see stuff that's out there and I would sort of like put it, plot it on this little graph. And, when you know it, the vast majority of stuff is bottom left quadrant is the worst quadrant to be in. There's so few things that are at all above a 5 in entertainment value. And there's a lot of stuff that's like pretty high on the educational value, but it's just very dry and not interesting. And so we sort of ran a thought experiment of like, well, how could we create like a 10 out of 10 entertaining, right? And so like this is still business content, so I'm not saying it's going to be a Marvel movie, but like what's the closest that we could get to doing that? And so I was like, what about, what if we start doing fiction? And so, Caspian Studios is a podcast as a service company. So we're making, B2B podcast and video series for other companies. And so, and we're really always trying to push them to make something cooler or better or more interesting, and just not sort of do generally boring stuff. Um, and we're like, what if we do fiction? And so I sent a note out to a bunch of CMOs and I was like, hey, we have some ideas for some fiction series. If anyone likes these, like, let me know and we'd love to make it. And wouldn't you know, the company, the CMO of Gym Pass, which is now WellHub, Ryan Benici, reached back. He was like, hey, this sounds awesome. I'd love to do this. And the pitch was for a show called Murder in HR, and basically it was going to be like a murder mystery, like thriller, set in a fictional tech company startup, and they hire a brand new head of HR, and that person, basically witnesses a murder and has to solve the murder. Um, and we said, well, instead of just doing it like a normal, you know, podcast, why don't we have A-list actors in it? And so we cast Kate Mara to play the lead. We cast Brett Gelman to play the other lead. And it's just this super crazy story. We published it now, as this was last year that came out, and now we're working on season 2 and 3 and 4 and all that stuff. But it was sort of this idea of, hey, how can we make something that's like truly entertaining, and then also like teaches you a little bit about HR. Um, and and yet, wouldn't you know it? Like, people loved it, right? So it got 1.2 million listeners in the first season and won a bunch of awards and won a couple Emmys, and people really liked it. And we had made a fiction series before this called The Hacker Chronicles, which was sort of our first version at this. And that was extremely well received, won a bunch of awards. And it just sort of is the idea that, like, if you can actually make something that's like consumer grade that people like, it will escape and it will create word of mouth and it will create buzz and it will create, excitement there. But if you're just keep making lower quadrant stuff, like, it's just never going to break through.
I think one thing that I think is the moonshot idea here, and I know you use that term a lot with content, but is you never really have seen fictional content in B2B
No,
forever. And B2B is always, let's be nice, like 2, 3, 4 years behind consumer content
or
when
even,
it's
or even more. I mean,
no, I'm being nice right now. But yeah, we're way, but B2B is way behind in content. So how did you like? Why do you think fiction is such a powerful tool in B2B? And how could people implement it successfully?
well, I think the first problem for B2B companies is that you're beholden to nonfiction, which means you always have to be at the very forefront of stuff, right? So you can sort of make three types of content. You can make backward looking stuff, like, let's analyze what has already happened. You can make stuff that's like very much in the moment, like, hey, this is what we're doing. Or you can sort of like try to predict the future and say, hey, this is, I want to skate where the puck is going. But in all those cases, you have to be really good and right, which means you have to get practitioners involved in the content, which is usually very hard, and not how your team is structured. And unless you're making sort of serialized content, as in like, podcasts and shows and bringing those people on and talking about stuff, it's going to be really hard to build it. But even if you get really good at that stuff, you never wholly control the narrative. So like, if you're going to do a customer story and you have some big customer, like we have Workato as one of our customers. Workato is amazing. They have this amazing show. It's done really well, but we're sort of beholden to their actual story, right? We can't like lie about stuff that they're doing. We just have to tell the truth of the story. And sometimes like those type of stories are really cool and you want to hear the truth, and we hear the truth a lot. But with fiction, what it allows you to do is the stories that you can't tell publicly, now you can tell those, right? The customer that says, hey, we can't be a reference for you, but this is actually what happened, right? And so there's stuff behind the scenes. And so, like, if you listen to Murder in HR, I'll spoil a little bit, is that it turns out it's not a regular tech company, it's a front for assassins. And so, you get into this crazy thing where you have this company of assassins and this person has to solve a murder. And it heightens the entire scenario. So she has to deal with regular HR problems, but also it's a company of assassins. So it just makes it funnier and more interesting, and it's played by professional actors, and you deal with the same problems. But if we had wrote a listicle that it's like how to deal with corporate toxicity, you might listen to it or read it or whatever and be like, okay, well, that's cool. But instead, what we did is we told a story that deals with all those same things. We talk about corporate toxicity. We talk about, how to deal with people who double book meetings and do like all this stuff. There are these little lessons along the way, but it's actually memorable and it's actually interesting. And at the end of it, you want to see who the killer is. And so you pay attention to the end. And so I think for a lot of people, that's kind of freeing, that's liberating to say, hey, if we use fiction, we can actually tell a cooler, more interesting story and like put all the stuff in there that we're not allowed to share publicly. So it's kind of crazy to me that more people don't do fiction, but I get why, right? Is because it's just not part of our culture, right? It's not part of our culture to like make up stuff in B2B and tell a story that way. And part of the reason is like, it's not interesting, right? So you have to add in something interesting. Not that our whole industry isn't interesting, but if you were to just say, hey, this is the fictional story of a digital transformation, you'd be like, okay, that's like, that's not in a world where this digital transformation happened. Like, that's not interesting. But if you say, oh, there's a murder and you got to figure out who did it, that's already interesting. And I know from the first second of hearing murder in HR, there's going to be a murder. You got to solve it. So, anyways, I think people should do fiction a lot more, and it's just not done at all. I'm not saying it needs to be your entire marketing mix, but like it's a great way to make something really cool that you couldn't normally do.
One thing I want to ask about, because this idea of murder HR is probably like on the high end of like big idea that you could do with content. What are some like quick wins that people could do before leading up to doing a huge show like Murder in HR or um, Hacker Chronicles or whatever other shows are you're producing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first off, like the sort of strategy that Caspian uses for our marketing, I can kind of talk through that and like how I think about it. So what Caspian does for our marketing is I sort of call it the three P's. Um, but it's podcasts, paid, and partnered. So we for podcasts we create original series for ourselves. We have a show called Remarkable that basically is like Hollywood storytelling blended with B2B. So it's super fun. We bring people on, we talk about their favorite content, and then we try to pull out some marketing lessons. But it's really fun. And to me, it's a show that never existed. I wanted it to exist, and I want to co-create, you know, content with the people that we care about in our community. So that's the first piece. Second piece is we run paid. So all the people who engage with us in any way, we retarget them and do stuff like that. And then the final piece here is to do partner activities with people who are selling to the same audience. So within that, as we think about sort of the first P, I call it podcast, but really it means original content. It's just easier to say three Ps. So when we think about our original content, the way that I think about it is in three buckets: shorts, shows, and moonshots. And the way that you want to structure this is shorts are short form video that get your message out in like 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Um, Shows are serialized content, so like a podcast or a video series or something, or an event series, something that has a brand name, Dreamforce, or Marketing Millennials, something that people can subscribe to on their platform of choice, YouTube or Spotify or whatever, and they get it in their feed directly. And then the final thing is moonshots, like big crazy projects that can be a moonshot. Now, a moonshot doesn't have to be a $10 million project or $1 million project or $100,000 project. It just has to be something that has a chance to go viral, that has a chance to make a bunch of money, create a bunch of pipeline or leads or, however you think about it, for a set price. So usually I would encourage people to think of big bets are the things that achieve the bigger results. Um, but if you want to start small, there's all sorts of ways that you can do that. We've seen people who've created, song albums. We've seen people who have created, uh, you know, yeah, like original songs, original comic book series that have created, original podcast series or fiction series there, obviously, that have created, little fake commercials that do really well with memes. I know you've talked about this on your show, before. Um, but it's just, doing things that can cut through the noise, right? Doing stuff that not a lot of other people are doing. And the way that I just view this stuff is that there's no traffic on the extra mile. The harder it is to make, the less people are going to do it. There's a reason why no one's made a fiction series starring A-list actors except for Caspian Studios ever, is because it's crazy hard. Like it's ridiculously hard to make it. But where where nobody else is, that's like where there's value, right? So yeah, I mean, like, the comic book example is like a great one, right? That does not cost that much money, right? Go find a comic book designer, get a contract with them, write the script yourself, and see where you get, right? Like that's not that expensive, but at least it's different, right? And then my final piece on this is tell the story as if it would be a consumer story. Do not try to like hand jam your product and service into it. You have so much marketing that already does that. Like you have plenty of marketing that does that. Just make something that's really good. That's just like truly entertaining. You whether it's like take a Marvel movie or the hero's journey or whatever it is, take your favorite piece of TV show or content or murder mystery or whatever, use that format and then just like create it for your audience and don't try to worry about features and benefits. It doesn't need to be a digital transformation thing. It does just like, you don't need any of that. Just make it good, make it interesting. And then people will like it and share it with their friends. They go, who made this again? It's like, oh, it's made by your company. So that's what I would recommend.
Um, I want to go into a little bit of the planning process of making a place like a moonshot piece of content. So, what do you think B2B marketers should consider to make sure that the content not only resonates with their audience, but also aligns with their business goals?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, this part of your budget is about getting people to know, like, and trust you, right? Like that's the goal. Is like you want them to know who that you are if they don't. You want them to like you more than they do, and you want them to trust you enough that they fill out a lead form, right? Like that's what you want. And so this part of your budget is, if you use the, demand creation and demand capture sort of framework, which is like 95% of people are not buying at any given moment. They're just existing and they're doing their daily lives. So you need to create demand for your product or service. So this is like a demand creation activity, which is like, hey, I didn't know who Caspian Studios was. Now I do because they made something cool that I liked, right? That's like as simple as this is. So in terms of like driving value, to me, it's just about, are you making something that people liked? Because if you made something that people are like, hey, I love that you do that, that's a huge win, right? Anything that your audience says that, hey, I love that you did that, that's like a huge win. So that's like how you need to think about this part of this budget item, right? Um, so then I think you need to find a story that you want to tell, right? Like everything has to be a story, right? And for this type of stuff, you want it to like really resonate and put your protagonist, who is your persona, in the center of it and say like, what does this person want? What do they want to do? So it's like you could just make up a story and it's like, you know, uh, our protagonist is an accountant. The end of the month is always the worst for them. They have a kid soccer game that they want to, it's on the 31st of October. They want to get home for that and they want to, and they want to make it home on time to see their kid, right? And it's like, okay, already you have a story, right? You have a deadline, you have a story, in theory your software solves that story. or whatever. Um, that you're not going to have to hand jam that in there. But the goal is, hey, let's just get them thinking about what if I could make my kid's soccer game? And then on the way there, an alien spaceship lands and captures them or whatever. I don't know. Just make something up. But all of a sudden, you now have a story that nobody else in B2B has ever told. Is like the story of an accountant who gets captured by aliens and needs to get back home to reach their kid's soccer game. Now, in this story, the same exact motivation that they have in real life is the same motivation in the story, which is they don't want to be working on the 31st of every month until 10 p.m., right? So that they can see their kid's soccer game. So all of a sudden you have a framework for a story that now you can just fill in all the details and make something silly. And then now you can make a 10 episode uh, novella, and each episode just write one page, or 2 pages, write a 20-page little treatment of this. And again, maybe you make it into you do sketches yourself or whatever. And then you tell the story of this thing. And maybe it's 10 slides. Maybe it's a comic book strip. So it's 10 slides on a LinkedIn, carousel image or something like that, right? And all of a sudden, and then you just look at the hero's framework or the hero's journey, map it onto the 10 episodes, and there you go. And like now all of a sudden you have a story that's totally absurd and stupid that maybe 80% of people can't stand, but 20% of people will be like, this rocks. And that's like what you're looking for, is like make something that people love, rather than I'm going to make a listicle called, 10 things you can do to get home to, shorten your, time that you spend at the end of every month. Yeah, you might should do that too, but make something that's different than what's out there.
Yeah, and it's also like how many people are like, I think 20% of people is not even a bit like a number that would like that white paper that you put out. It's probably 0.05% would like a white
Yeah.
paper. But you're trying to 10, 20x who's listening, who's paying attention, who's trying to, because obviously if you make something that 100% people like is just going to be big mush and go nowhere. So you got to make the 20% that people that actually care, have the problem, want it to be solved, find it entertaining. And then if that doesn't hit, you can go into the next story and the next story and the next story until it hits. So it's just
Yeah.
trying
And,
new things.
oh no, yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that part of the problem is, again, like what someone will do is they'll take that story and then they'll start jamming their brand into it. And it's like, you don't need to. It's your story that your company made. They're going to see that you're in it, right? You're the creator of it. Like, you don't need to then say, and then they found, our product. It's like, no, that's already baked into your whole, everything that you do is then they found your product, right? Just make something that's cool. One of the things that with Murder in HR that was really cool was we're talking to CHROs and chief people officers after the show came out. And one of the chief people officers was like, "Hey, I really love the show." I was like, "Oh, that's super cool. Thanks so much for listening." They're like, "Yeah, I listen with my daughter." And I was like, "You do?" She's like, "Yeah." She's like, "She loves murder mysteries. Like, we watch Only Murders in the Building together. So like, this is right up our alley." So I sent it to her, and then like we would like listen to it and talk to each other about it. And I'm like, "What do you think? What percentage do you think number of people have ever had their kids also listen or watch or read anything they do at work ever, that they could actually talk about it outside of work?" And so on one hand, obviously that's incredible because you're creating word of mouth and something that has never happened before. On the other hand, I know what some people think, well, that's kind of waste, right? It's like, well, that's one listener of the podcast that wasn't an HR professional, one of the 1.2 million listeners, right? That wasn't an HR professional. Why do we want them? And the truth is, if you make something so good that someone's daughter can listen to it too, that means it's really, really, really good. and your target audience is probably going to love it that much more. And like we got for Murder in HR, we got invites from the Boston HR group. They reached out to us about we're going to do like a private event this year as like the launch for season 2 and all sorts of cool stuff. Like HR people really loved it. And it generated word of mouth, and they all know who Gym Pass is, and they all understand that Gym Pass is part of this. And we didn't, we actually had product placement for Gym Pass in the show, which is really nice too. But Gym Pass it's not like a super heavy handed thing where, that's all they talk about all season. It's like, hey, and also, by the way, we use Gym Pass, So anyways, there's really cool and clever ways to do it. And I think that if you're telling a story the right way, you just want people to consume it and go, you know what? I like that company. And like our favorite companies, right? Like Nike or Yeti, or, you think of all these people, it's like they tell stories. Apple, all of these, they tell stories with the way that they do their advertising, and it's really well done. And we like their ads, right? Um, uh, so anyways, I digress.
No, this is how I think about content in general, is that if you think about your content as a product, and you try to make the best product for your audience, you stop thinking about your product as like being the center. You start thinking about, how can I make the best content for my audience? And then you think, how could I innovate? How can I make it different? How could I invest in it? But most people don't view content as the actual product, the product that you're actually trying to market to an audience. They think about their own product. And once I shift my mindset of thinking, how can I create a piece of content that is the best for the audience, I don't really care if they could find Marketing Millennials or not, or whatever I'm trying to market through, that it's posted on my channel or that it's on somewhere else. That's all I cared about. But shifting that mindset of content is the product is the way I shifted it, to be able to start thinking about different ideas, innovating on content, not only just thinking about my company as the number one thing out there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the goal, right? It's just like hopefully they like your stuff. And there's other types of marketing. There's product marketing and other things that you're doing to surround this person with product messaging. Like when someone engages with something that Caspian Studios does, somewhere around the internet, they're going to get followed around with an ad that's more product specific to like, hey, do you want to launch a company podcast? Right? That's going to happen. We know who the target accounts are. We know who we're going after. Like we know who they are. So it's like, it's silly to me to just try to like shove product down their throat when like this other way is way easier, is just make something that they actually love. And then we can follow up with that with product messaging. Like you don't need to do both at the same time. Like you really don't. It's just not necessary.
Yeah, you got to just, the key, like you said earlier, is you got to create people staying top of mind for a long period of time till they need your product. And how you're going to do that is create entertaining content that keeps you relevant for a long period of time. Because ads only do so much. Like ads help you most of the time just to stay a little bit relevant, and then also if you're in the buying mode, that minute or second you'll buy. But content, you can do so many more things with to keep people engaged for a longer period of time. And that's why I think one point we're missing, and we haven't really doubled down on and said this, is that's why series are so big too, because it keeps people coming back, and also keeps people watching more, and also going back to watch. They know that there's a original piece of content, and I think you see this more with creators on TikTok doing that. You see that with creators in B2C doing this all the time, but you don't really see series in B2B where people can come back to episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4, episode 5, everything.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I think about this stuff. You want it to be And the reason why I like short shows and moonshots as a sort of like a framing is because shorts are sort of like just hopefully you're getting in front of someone just like a little bit, you know, every so often, right? It's like every, couple days or every week or every whatever. But it's not depth. It's not thorough, right? Which shows you're something you're getting in front of someone hopefully every week, but you're getting the depth. They see how you think beyond just sort of being interesting for a moment or funny for a moment. You get the depth. And with moonshots, you're hopefully getting a huge spike where it's like really memorable, right? Where like if you were to ask one of your listeners, what's your favorite episode of Marketing Millennials? They might not know. They might not have a favorite one. They're like, I don't know. They're all kind of good or whatever. Whereas if you ask someone, if you were to, I don't know, do a stunt where did a backflip off of Salesforce Tower, and landed in a pool of Jello, they'd be like, "Oh, I remember that. Like that was crazy when Daniel did that." Um, and I think that's the difference, right? And that's sort of a stunt, right? But it's the idea of like it's something that's like super memorable that uh that will stick with them, right? Whereas like the stuff that's sort of on an ongoing basis might not be as memorable, but you're keeping, sort of top of mind.
Yeah, I mean, someone who's doing this really well right now from B2B perspective is ClickUp with
Yeah.
their HR stuff too, where they have like sing-alongs to different, um, basically HR popular songs, but in HR funniness. And I think they took like an a basic idea and made it really funny, really hilarious, and really relevant to an audience that could find that funny. So, and it's a series because they created multiple short pieces of content that they can post on social. And I bet they have the longer form somewhere too. I don't know. I haven't dug that deep, but someone who's doing that well is ClickUp as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that they focus specifically on social with those initiatives. And I think that um, it's just positive vibes, right? It's just like, hey, ClickUp made this funny video. It's great. Like that's all you need. That's good enough, right? It won the day, right? Like that is totally good enough. Their album, and I've interviewed Chris Cunningham on this. Uh, their album did like 1 million streams. Their music album that they did. That's crazy. It's like insane, right? And they've
Yeah.
always done a lot of stunts. They've always done a lot of social stuff. It's sort of core to their DNA to do silly social sort of stunts like that, and like that stuff works, right? Now, at the end of the day, like ClickUp is solving a problem about productivity and using data and all these things. Like that ain't in that video, at all.
Well,
That's fine, right? And I guarantee you they have stuff on their site that's like, this versus that, competitor analysis, all the things that are on. I guarantee you they have all that stuff. If you do an enterprise deal with them, like they have all that stuff. But the stuff that, those their little moonshots that they shoot work really well.
last question I have for you is, what is a marketing hill you would die on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, obviously huge believer in content, uh, specifically serialized content. But I would say um, you should be creating for each persona that you have and each role that you have. And you should be creating series for each of those personas. And I strongly believe this. I would die on this hill because so much stuff in content is made for two people. Oh, it's made like a CMO would love this and a CIO because those are their two buyers. Well, guess what? CIOs and CMOs rarely pay attention to the same stuff. So you're making it for both and you're actually making it for nobody. So like what you really want to do is just niche down a ton to the actual personas that you really want to be going after and make it as specific to them as possible. And I'll give an example of this. It's like if you have a show if you're making your audience is accountants, it's like, that's way too broad, right? What is like specifically what types of accountants, and what level of accountants, and what types of companies are they working for? And what are the differences between, an accountant that works for X company, a media company, versus an accountant that works for, another type of company? And I see so many people create content that's for like big top of funnel. This is like very old school thinking. This is like back in the day when we used to read very large publications, and now everything is about like hyper niche publications. I would rather have 20 shows that serve all of the different people than try to make like one tentpole one. And I see people make this mistake all the time, that they just don't really do that. So yeah, that's what I'll die on that hill.
And lastly, where can people find you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm just I'm I'm on LinkedIn at Ian Faison, or Ian dash Faison, I think it is. And then on but mostly on LinkedIn. You can go to caspianstudios.com, learn more about us. And I'm on Twitter X, at Ian Faison, or anywhere pretty much there. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to, you know, brainstorm or share ideas. If like, I love hearing people's crazy ideas. Every marketer has a crazy idea that they're afraid to tell anyone because they think they're going to get fired. So if you want to share your crazy ideas with me, I would love to hear them, and jam on them with you and figure out a way for you to get it made.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. I think it helps marketers think there's so many different possibilities, especially B2B marketers, where we've been stuck in the mode of just create webinars, just create white papers, just create blog posts, just create. I think thinking a little bit differently. Maybe you can use fiction in your marketing. Maybe you should develop a show that's entertaining. Also, a lot of content is swings and pendulums. Like, highly produced content was not a thing. It was a big thing. Then it went down to a pendulum of everybody can create content, and then now everybody's creating content. So series are becoming a new thing, a thing again. So it's these pendulums that happen with content, which is cool to see.
Oh, for sure. And final piece there is like, everyone's been able to write a book since paper and a pencil was invented, right? That doesn't make it easy, right? So it's like, anytime I talk to anyone like, well, should I make this? It's like, oh, well, there's so many things out there. There's so many white papers out there. There's so many podcasts out there. There's so many books out there. Like, should I make it? It's like, for the rest of human history, we will keep making stuff in whatever format it is. That just like, but the best stuff is the stuff that'll stand out, right? So it's like, you got to keep making stuff. The world changes every freaking second. People are looking for the next thing, right? They always are. So don't ever be feel like that it's too late, or that your idea isn't worth it, or anything like that. Like, you got to just keep making stuff that you think that your audience will love. And if you let that guide you, and hopefully you'll love it too, then you'll be on the right track.
Well, thank you so much for joining. This has been great, and I really appreciate you.
Cool. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Thanks so much for listening. Keep tuning in to hear more great insights from the coolest marketers from around the world. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and follow the Marketing Millennials podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, I would greatly appreciate you giving us a 5-star rating. It helps bring more marketers into our community.